coming to the eText Go podcast, where we explore the human experiences we have today for you. We are going to talk about Jesus, the man, the criteria he had, his teachings, how he became a patient man, a man he loved, a man who was a teacher, a rabbi, a man who not only left great teachings, but his behavior did not. What did you do? Have that criterion, and we know not to distinguish. We know that Jesus was God, but we don't want to focus on God's part. We want to focus on his steps as a human being on earth, because he has very great philosophies, right? And his philosophies to this day stand and have changed many lives. So let's talk about Jesus Christ, the human being. And if you have any questions, don't worry. Leave a comment, subscribe if you like our channel. It helps us a lot so that we continue to maintain these programs, and like it and share it so that people know and see what we are producing. But we're going to give it to that. What do you think of Jesus the man? Because many of us know about Jesus God. But very rarely do we interpret what Jesus was like being a man. And we are going to start today with that topic. David, Jesus, man, how do you want to start this topic? What happens is that Jesus as a man can be seen from different angles. Why? Because Jesus as a man, first you have to go when he was a child. Because I believe that the man or woman, let's say so, not to leave aside any gender, you become having a good foundation as a son or as an infant or as a child. So always for this, the child will always be educated by father and mother. And of that education is the main basis or the main basis for all of us in our adult lives to have good judgment. Let's be good people. Our main base is family. So having a good family will mean that the child and the adult will be the person we end up with, or the person we know. I mean, the main basis of all this is family and our parents. So for this, you had the best parents training. So I believe that we owe a lot of this to his earthly mother and father, because in the spiritual part, we already know who Jesus' father is then. But in the earthly part, having a father or who guided, a mother who guided, who cultivated love for everyone. Also, his desire for knowledge, to love others, to always generate help, to always be attentive and attentive, also generated good oratory. Sure. It also generated commitment to society or to everyone. It generated leadership. He generated critical thinking from a very young age that educated adults, and there are many biblical passages that tell us this, that he educated adults, that he was a person who from a young age knew that he had to be trained because he was going to be, let's say, the light and guide of many. Of course, and since he was little, he knew the responsibility he had under his shoulders, but he never generated that he was validated for being the Son of God, for being God on earth. Let's put it this way. He never needed validation. He had humility from a young age and generated that beacon of light that he needed, or that he knew had to be. So he formed himself to be that great leader and that great beacon of light, as they say. Sure, and we have to start too, like how? how Jesus Christ was born, right? That is how Jesus was born. Jesus was born in a very humble place. It was even practically cold ground. So its formation had very humble roots. And here comes too, perhaps the first trauma of their parents having to escape, because remember they were killing all the firstborn and they had to flee to Egypt. So we have to understand what he learned, what he was able to see in Egypt, no, what kind of teachings there was, because it was from a city, from a town to a great city, not that of. There was definitely one reason why he went to Egypt. Also to see a different culture, a big city where you could also go unnoticed in the sense that no one was going to recognize you, or they did not want it to be recognized at that moment. They wanted that it could mix, but at the same time also generate another type of behavior, that you are more careful, that it generates introspection. What do you have to do? Of course, and as it always was, it was a people that was always diminished, let's say it like this, or equated or repressed. So this always had to go unnoticed because you couldn't. In those times, standing out was not an option. And the important thing is, because we always talk about the importance of family, and we know that, for example, Jesus was conceived by the Spirit, but he had an earthly father whose name was Joseph. And Joseph was a very God fearing man, a carpenter, just as Jesus was. And the teaching that Joseph's importance in the life of Jesus, as much as it was Mary, logically not, because Mary perhaps taught him many things inside the home, but Joseph taught him external things. How should he have behaved with other people? No, because we must remember in these times, the man was the one who was always out socializing. Women passed through the house. So maybe we'll start from there. What do you think he was able to learn from Joseph under the teachings of Joseph in his early years? First, I believe that work patience, accuracy.
Carpentry.
Carpentry, but there you are not only teaching carpentry, but first, it is a responsibility to do things in order, that is order, tenacity, being a constant person, knowing how to choose, because it is not that you had materials in abundance, but that you had to know how to choose the moment, the type of wood, the tools, be methodical, be patient, be this. Imaginative, because being a creator, creating something, because back then you had to create the tools. They weren't like those now. So you had to create tools or have the right tools to do a job. So from there, in the part, let's say non-emotional, emotional, and at the same time also training, learn all this from the ground up. So that everything you do the same, that is with dedication, rectitude, knowing what materials to use, how to create something. Of course. And for example, here you can also see what the true teaching was, as you say, because for him to be able to be a person who not only must comply with not sinning throughout his life. We are not talking about spiritual submission, but the one in the flesh had to leave that, not sin. So, having perhaps all these mechanisms, as you say, carpentry demands a lot of your time, a lot of your thoughts, a lot of concentration, right? Maybe in the carpentry, he found a mechanism where Jesus, as both divine and human, used such focus, perhaps gained through carpentry, as a mechanism to live sinlessly as man and God.
Help us continue to embrace these human experiences and explore more about ourselves and others by just subscribing. If you like our content, definitely like, comment, share it. But also, if you want to be part of our podcast, all you have to do is leave a comment and tell us what you want to talk about. Remember, this is the platform for the people, and we're here to explore those life experiences that are very unique to you and to everyone else. Don't forget to subscribe.
So, by not sinning, he had to be well disciplined. But not only disciplined, but he had to have had his father, in this case Joseph, also a very good spiritual education, right?
Of course, then by always accompanying him, I believe that when and every time we are doing something, there are many topics of conversation for that. Let the day not be long, as those who talk then know how to say, also between Joseph and Jesus. The conversations they had were that great foundation because they spent a lot of time together. So, apart from talking about how he didn't have to sin, the very knowledge of what his behavior is like, corrections. Not at him, but at the behavior they saw around him. Every child generates many questions and many doubts. So the father always ends up instructing his son.
Không,
How or why is that wrong? Why is what we are seeing not the most appropriate than the education he received from his father, from his mother? They were the foundation so that he first would not sin, and second be the man he was. That's the guide.
Of course, and here we also have to talk about the great responsibility that his parents had. In what way? In raising him as an ordinary human being, knowing that he was God, of course, that him.
not that.
It feels different? Of course, it's not that different.
It had to have been a very, very big responsibility. Not because you know or what. I know my son came from the Spirit, right? And now he lives in him in an earthly life. But how do we make him feel loved like any other child, right?
And not only that, but to make him feel part of the group or in normal quotes like that.
That he belongs to society like any other person. But here he also comes, for example. That's why I think Jesus became very adaptable when he went to Egypt, because in Egypt there were different cultures. No, it wasn't just Judaism, it wasn't just the Israelites, but here there were many pagan cultures. No, and maybe he saw what those pagan cultures logically could assimilate, be there and not feel like who says he is, because at the end of the day it's not him who sins but the people who are worshiping other gods. Maybe that exposing himself, that perhaps helped him a lot in his judgment, to know how to manage other people's opportunities. Because if we start looking at what they were doing, you write them down. And the Pharisees, they didn't even approach these people because they treated them like unworthy people. So Jesus Christ, maybe, or Jesus man, learned from what? Well, these people are just like any other person, only they've taken the wrong path, and you have to maybe learn how to educate ourselves, but educate them. But in order to educate them, we have to first learn how to approach.
Of course, the first thing is acceptance, accepting that we are all different, accepting that you can change, that you can reorient. If they're wrong, you can reorient. And it's all education. Something I now began to think about was that he also needed this, to be surrounded by all this, to understand and know. Because let's see, there is nothing better than knowing the environment in which you operate to see what is wrong, because then I know how I can change it, how I can reorder it. Because here it is not only a change, it is that he also orders him to be Jewish and make him see how you are doing it. It is not right, or what you are worshiping is not right. Why? Because I teach you how to do it or who you have to follow. So if you don't know this, not who are you going to organize? Who are you going to do that? Believe your word. Who are you going to lead if you don't know everything? No, you don't know different cultures, you don't know different religions, how they think, how they are formed. So what he saw is that first acceptance, you have to accept it in case everyone, even if he is wrong, you have to make him see it.
Of what?
Why could he be mistaken? Let's consider. Is accepting the first step.
And I think I like that approach of Jesus. Man, why? Because if you don't know the problem, how are you going to find the solution? So by reading, being immersed where the problem was, he was able to generate, as you say, like a laboratory test. He was able to generate, as you say, his order, not only his thoughts, but also begin to plan why people acted that way. Why are you seeing her? Behavior doesn't, and seeing behavior, he can tie things to this, inspires them to do this. So knowing those things, I can connect this way and maybe my message will get through, right? But we see that, for example, while Jesus grows up, logically, unfortunately, his father dies. I can't imagine that. That it must have been a great pain for him, because a lot of people say, well, Jesus, God can bear everything, but that doesn't mean he didn't suffer. So I want to talk specifically about that, not the suffering that he may have had since his father died to his life. That is everything that was before what he died when his father died. Because no, do we see the him, the Jesus God who can endure a beating, humiliation, but inside he felt? What are you thinking there?
Yes, let's see. First, as I tell you, in order for you to talk about something, you have to know it. So he had to read and soak up everything. His father was always his earthly father. In this case, Joseph was their guide. He was his mentor, because every father is a mentor, and not having one anymore is a very tragic thing. But the quota overcomes that situation very quickly, because it also tells us part of the lesson and the Bible, that he knew that he was going to a better place and that he was the right person, that is Jesus, so that because the mission he had was that, and he arrived and did that with his work, may he reach the end of the part of the redemption of sins, and that we may have what is called eternal life, and that there he was going to meet again. So he already knew that what was going to happen, therefore it's sad not to have your mentor anymore, let's put it that way. But she also knew what plans he had to fulfill. So he knew that. With his goal fixed, he advanced unwaveringly, knowing it was the bridge to reconnect both with his father and his earthly mother.
Of course, and Jesus here, for example, when he is a child, he disappears before his non-earthly parents, and they find him in the synagogue talking about God. Then when his father asks him, we didn't know where he was. And he says, well, I should know that I'm here at my father's house. So, for example, having that knowledge as a child and the responsibility of knowing that you have to fulfill a mission that no one could fulfill except him has to be very overwhelming. It has to be knowing your destiny. And I think we talk about this once we know your fate, the day it's going to happen and how it's going to happen, coming with a lot of havoc. Because sometimes we human beings want to know everything, know the future, predict certain things. But it's better not to know. No, but Jesus did know. He knew submission. He knew. I knew what was going to happen to him, but imagine as a child being able to endure, but you are not, and accept all that information. Of course, but those who helped him choose to take out his family exile, his mother, so that's the support he had. He couldn't have other parents. He didn't have the best parents, so he could first know what their destiny was and that they help release a little their burden and above all the responsibility and inertia of the parents because they knew that they had to raise that person, that human being at that time, at that moment to fulfill a mission. Of course. And here comes the preparation. No, because his preparation to be a teacher is 30 years. So not only once his mentor was gone, he had to learn outside himself from outside his mentor. Many things, no. So he turns 30 and already here he is considered a rabbi. He's not going to start teaching others.
But there you have to make a period or a parenthesis. Let's put it this way. He always had to educate himself.
Exactly, because
Because if he didn't, no, he couldn't fulfill his mission. So he was always educating himself, not only from the family or the environment, because it protected him and sheltered him in each of the stages of his life. But he also had to educate himself and read and know that the only way to generate that type of leadership is to know and practice.
likewise.
If not, you cannot generate this mission. So he had a time of, or was protected by your parents in the attractive part, in the orientation part. Otherwise, he also had to educate himself, read a lot of the word and everything in order to be able to communicate.
No, and also, for example, no. For example, for him not to sin, he had to know all the sins. He had to know how it was generated, what the instincts were. That is, and it is true, what, how.
And how to control yourself?
And how exactly do you control yourself? Because here comes something very detailed. Logically, in the Bible are all the details of what you should not do and what is considered a sin and all the rituals you should perform. No, then. Not only did Jesus, as you say, soaked himself in all this information, but he had to perfectly experiment theory with practice so as not to fall into sin, and which he never fell into sin. It's how it brings me. I remember when someone talks about Mozart, and they said that when they saw Mozart's works, there was never a mark of correction. That's how it was. Practically the flawless life of Jesus Christ. I want, that is Jesus, man. I want people to understand the magnitude of his behavior, his intelligence, because everyone considers Mozart, Beethoven, Da Vinci geniuses, but no one catalogs Jesus as a genius.
It's astounding how the genius of Jesus often goes unacknowledged. Devote yourself 100% to understanding and applying. Failure is not an option.
That's right.
master knowledge, embody it, and never falter in its practice.
Why isn't Jesus regarded universally as a genius? He is the epitome of brilliance in every way imaginable.
Yeah, but don't put it on. Or it is not considered as we are seeing it, as the human part always sees it as deity, but also as deity or as a god. The gods don't fail and they don't make mistakes. So there they say, so since a god is not wrong, then I can't consider it. No. His genius was different. That's why I told you to bring him to the human side, where you have to consider him as a genius, because as a human, if we see him as the human part or in his human part, no, we already know that he was God, the Son of God. But if we bring him as a human who is currently with us on the podcast, let's put it this way, he was a genius.
Exactly.
And not only in the aspect, for example, of behavior, but psychological in the aspect of knowledge, of your communication. Because here comes the detail. No, he is already forged as a teacher and he specifically seeks his disciples. It's not, no, it's like a school that takes anyone. He goes looking, and that's what I want to talk about. Why do you think Jesus the man can look for his why?
Because it is the only way, because you know what you want to communicate and you have to choose who is the best receiver and in turn who can transmit. But let's see, people do not see the genius of Jesus, but if we bring any of his phrases, they have a special genius. The best for me, one of the best, is the parable of the sower.
Oh, yeah, spectacular. Same then.
It's a phrase, one that seems spectacular to me, especially because there are parts of behavior there. There are situations of learning and even envy, I say. Why? Because hey, and why? Why to him? Yes. Why to him who is here, the one who is here? Not because I throw my words into the wind like the sower, you are me. That is, I speak and I simply don't care who is listening to me. Let's put it this way. If that person is the one who is going to listen to me and who is going to follow me, that is going to be my fruit. And he's going to replicate what I'm going to say or my behavior, what I say you have to do to be everything but me. He spoke to him like this, be he beggar, be he a millionaire towards, but he is he to whom I have to reach, or my word in this case. I mean, the parable of the sower is spectacular.
That phrase is incredibly spectacular, my brother, making it truly remarkable for him.
That simple?
Yes, but let me explain further. Merely saying that unveils the genius hidden within the dialect, don't you think?
Help us continue to embrace these human experiences and explore more about ourselves and others by just subscribing. If you like our content, definitely like, comment, share it. But also, if you want to be part of our podcast, all you have to do is leave a comment and tell us what you want to talk about. Remember, this is the platform for the people, and we're here to explore those life experiences that are very unique to you and to everyone else. Don't forget to subscribe.
In wanting to give a teaching, in teaching.
Sure, why, for example, the way he teaches, he uses many metaphors and many paradoxes, but he does it because he wants you to think beyond and he wants you to relate to what exists.
That you generate with your experience.
Exactly, whatever you do, a comparison of your life with the example he is giving you or the story. Because if you start thinking about that story that he is talking about, you exist. There is something about you there in which you have to re examine many of his parables. It was that re examination, reflection. Think about that. For example, the reflection of the son of the prodigal son is very beautiful, isn't it? Why? Because he's a touching story. Because the son misbehaves, that is, decides to leave his father's house. No, and tells him, "Give me my inheritance." His father, who loves him, gives him all his inheritance. He takes them to waste on women, on all things in the world. Then, poor thing, he had nothing left. He slept worse than his father's servants. No, and he returns, and when his father sees him, he returns. The father rejoices, has the biggest lambs killed to celebrate, and hugs him. When you see him, you make him dress in purple, you make him dress like royalty, and there's a celebration, right? And in that celebration, it's because he says, "So my son was dead and he's alive." So there is a resurrection. There is no resurrection, a change of returning from evil to good. And his son, who was with him, was a little jealous, wasn't he? "Why don't you do that?" "Because he's with him every day." And the answer is very simple, because everything that is my study exactly, that is, you can kill the lamb and do it now. If you decide not to do it, why haven't you done it? If you know that what is mine is yours, but your brother didn't have that, your brother didn't have anything, he lost everything I gave him. And he bet it wrong, but now he's back and he's got the same thing you have. So here comes I think it's something so well explained, but so simple. But I'm going to go, because if you see it in a video until you cry, it makes you cry.
That's why I tell you, all these parables and phrases are spectacular. They are geniuses. Or this phrase that "me too," which is not the one that is not the stone, stone. This book of sin, then no one, that is everyone, wanted to squander.
But here, the interesting thing is that he who had the authority to do it, because he was sinless, had already forgiven and had already given thanks to that woman, right? And that's the detail that the others believed themselves. Free of sins, that no, it wasn't like that. They wanted to judge him and kill him, no. And he who was just did not think that way or act that way. Rather, he was a defender of a sinful person, because there is the grace that the human being did not have. That is, that he's his. The other human beings did not have.
It makes the people there reflect on their actions. Let's say, angry about throwing the stone. She says, "It's true. I mean, I'm playing someone and I also do the same or something similar. Then maybe I'll have to be squandered too. Then no, then I better limp and go." It is the best one of the best phrases to say.
Don't do evil.
Don't do evil. That is, you have to do good.
So judge.
Of course, don't judge, because that's practically up to me and my father. That is, there are so many good teachings here, because Jesus, even exactly the wisdom, logically, why do I think not only here I do have to mix a little? The man Jesus has wisdom of the infinity of the universe. So we're talking about that. There is so much knowledge from the beginning of time in a man, and that is why perhaps his behavior is sinless. If you have knowledge of everything and know how everything begins and ends, logically you know that your behavior has to be appropriate and not the most important thing, that Jesus always led by example.
That's something that makes me admire Jesus deeply.
Humility in his wisdom,
That's right.
because there are wise men who do not communicate.
Oh, that's absolutely true.
Humility plays a significant role. Let's think of it as the foundational aspect.
Humans, naturally.
Humility.
Humility, and also put yourself in the shoes of others. But something that I did like about Jesus as a leader, because Jesus was an innate leader, was that he had a lot of grace, that is, grace and mercy. But when he had to correct, he was very assertive, he was direct to the point. And although he gave you the metaphor and he gave you the parable, that is, he gave you the teaching, but he also gave you the example. I mean, Jesus was like the perfect teacher, because Jesus, man, pointed out what you did wrong, not the example. No, the example of the woman who was taking water from Jacob's well. No, he tells her, well, I'm someone bigger than Jacob. No, but he tells her humbly. He doesn't tell her like someone who says tenaciously. And he says, you've been married, this is your fifth man, but you're not married, but you're not making judgmental if you're not telling him this. I know you're sinning. I know you're in sin, but you're better than that, because I believe you, because you're something that I believe. So you owe yourself the dignity that you deserve, right? And that I believe that Jesus, that's what I always talk about in his teachings. You are worthy. You deserve better. And that's something I've always liked. Why? Because his behavior was always dignified. So that was the example, I think, greater than perhaps he gave his apostles, apart from the fact that they always repeated to them, have faith, right?
Moreover, his eloquence and impactful communication resonated widely, even influencing non-believers who acknowledged his profound wisdom. It was well accepted. Then even the non-believers began to see in him the teacher of the teacher. They began to see him that they had to generate that change. And his apostles followed him for wisdom and teachings. And not only that, but he also indicated the promised land of what we are going to have. The idea, the religious part, well, but it's his behavior, his leadership, his knowledge, his wisdom and humility, and the way he transmitted. I mean, he was a leader, sorry, eloquent, and they are phrases and parables. You really analyze them and put them in the context of your life, and they are spectacular.
Sure, and something I really like are the Beatitudes. I believe that the Beatitudes are very beautiful, not Beatitudes. And that is what he says is also not this. He will not have me and always, but he will always have the poor. And that is small things like who says, if you treat the poor well, it is as if you were treating me well. Because I am no longer on earth, no, but I leave you an inheritance to the poor. Treat them well. I mean, they are small words, that is small phrases, but they come. Can you imagine how the man Jesus felt when he performed these miracles? No, because he had as a man, not flesh that he feels. He saw, for example, disabled people that he healed. What kind of love could have been generated in him so that he not only approached the lepers without fear, logically because he was not afraid to approach, but the level of his companionship has to be inexplicable.
What happens is that he was always educated because his father did everything and he knew what it was. But he knew that he had to fulfill a mission, which was service, and within his service was to help everyone. So I'm not talking about helping, about taking, and I'll help you hit him. A couple of punches that offended me was to generate. That people have a change and see something different That is, within the situation, which was very conflictive, where he was born at the moment he was born, the conflictive part of wars plagues many
Things.
occupation, slavery, segregation of many people, discrimination. Everything. And he knew that your mission was to guide, to be a person who had to have service, to serve others, but an area of service without remuneration. And not because you had to serve, because you have to serve everyone. I mean, there is no selfishness here, no profit. Without any service, then approaching a person who had already been separated for having an illness, or one that I know for being segregated, for not believing, or for having an illness, and where he and giving him the first test that is compassion.
Of course. And not only compassion, but also and I am going to repeat it, make these people feel worthy. Because remember, when you are segregated, the first thing you feel is that you are dishonored, that you have no honor, that you have no dignity, that you are not on par with the others. And Jesus, man, logically part of healing them, the message was stand up, go. It was like someone who says you are worthy, you are already healthy, and you were always worthy even when you were sick. So I believe that his man's teaching in the aspect of healing, as you say, is that he knew that his yes was non-profit logically. But here comes the teaching too, where he leads by example, because he knows that his treasures were not earthly. His treasures exactly, his philosophy and his teaching were his apostles, and the others he is. I don't care what you're going to give me here, because everything here is going to go away. So where I'm giving it, it's more.
I won't remain here.
Exactly, I won't be here either. So why treasure things here on earth that are going to one day not exist, but I'm going to do it in a place that is eternal. So he gives us the example of that, of doing a good job and not worrying about where your daily bread comes from, because that was one of the problems also as a man that the apostles always had. How are we going to do this? And doubt, right? And they saw miracles and still there was doubt.
But doubt exists because you doubt when you don't believe.
Exactly.
Doubt arises, but faith removes it. You don't know. That's why it was about faith that you always repeated, have faith. Faith is dispelling a doubt.
Of course. And for example, we can talk a little about this, not about Jesus, man. Jesus, man, logically, with his divine power, is walking on water, right? And there's a big storm. And the apostles think it's a ghost and there's lightning. And logically, the sea is whipping the boat. And we see how. And I really like this phrase because Pedro comes out of the boat to try to get closer and says, Rabbi, if it's you, leave it. Let me walk on the water and come to you. And logically, he walks on water because he had faith, and suddenly lightning in the storms. He gets scared and he goes out and asks for help immediately. No. And it's fascinating, like the specific phrases he uses. He is a man of little faith because you did not believe. That is the perfect words for a perfect moment, as you say. Not only was he eloquent, but the level of wisdom fascinates me. Jesus, man. Logically, God also has the level of wisdom to know when and how to say something.
And that those phrases, as we said, you can use them personally when something happens to you. then he is a man of little faith, and you live and you say it's true and you feed yourself. The sense that I am doing wrong is true, and all these phrases. People generate change for you, and you know that you have to change, because when you already take it as your experience, you make it yours, you make it experiential. And what's more, you learn from that. I think the mistakes. When you do something experiential, these types of phrases help you.
Of course, and it also gives you understanding because, for example, let's say you are working on a project, right? And really you lose faith. You have an example in the scriptures, not of a human being like Peter who was walking around his belief, and because he lost belief in himself and belief in the God that he serves completely sinks. Because here's the metaphor: you sink when you stop believing that you can do something. No, and I think that's the thing about Jesus, right? Yes, if you have faith in me, you can walk calmly, you can even run a marathon in the water, right? And that's why he also has the metaphor of the mustard seed faith. If we had the faith of a mustard seed, right?
Sure, we could move up mountains. It's true, Eva. And if you put it in inside, your experience in any life situation, you say, what happens is that I am capable of doing it. I didn't have that security. Sure, I can do it.
And here comes the psychological knowledge of Jesus, because he knows that anxiety, depression, he knows that fear, all these things influence that we don't have faith like the seed of a mustard, because that's what he is giving us to understand in these classes, no? Because he gives spectacular classes.
That's why I say, if here we are speaking within sentences, and a person told you that he was very wise, and that we are still talking after 2,000 years.
Sure, and for example, let's talk a little bit about David's. Of the man Jesus in the desert, the 40 days in the desert, he decides to desolate himself so that he can strengthen his spirit, not his resilience. Because logically, what he had to prepare for was something that we're going to talk about more later, not that it was something completely catastrophic. Let's talk about that moment in the desert as a man.
First of all, a normal man can't stand long. That's true, just starting.
But remember that his phrase there says, on bread, neither bread nor wine he lives, neither bread nor water does man live, right?
Sure, you have to feed your spirit.
Exactly, then he goes to the desert. And not only the desert is a hostile place, but also it is a place, and we are going to add the seasoning that it does not have good company. No, here we are going to enter the spiritual field a little bit. Why? Because Jesus, man, enters as a man into the desert, but he is tempted by Satan.
Sure, but why exactly? Because I wanted it to fail.
I wanted to.
Fail in the sense to be silent, that is the sins, but he has the strength of it, of his critical thinking, and not to do it. Another is the fact of also enduring a desert. It's like,
Sorry to interrupt. David brings me, I remember this part of Jesus brings me. I remember why Jesus listens to proposals. It's not that he says, shut up, he listens to them. But his discernment does not understand that these promises have no value to him. And the most important thing here is that every time he spoke, it was biblical things. I mean, he was talking about things that were already in the Bible. He never speaks for himself. He listened, interpreted that they were tempting him, that those promises of truth, no.
They were not. They were vague compared to what he will expect in heaven, and hence his answers were always biblical.
Sure, why? Because let's see why they were biblical. Because you have to put it to temptation in this case.
In its place. The evil one.
And God then, of course, it's a little higher up, let's put it that way. But you have to answer one by one to see how to say it. At the height of the problem, you have to make the answers. So the answer was always directed towards the part of biblical spiritual knowledge. It was a more spiritual answer. What a human, let's say, oriented to what you tell me is not there. Or it's not because I know my father and this is what my father wants, or so my father thinks. Or we want to get to this because my spiritual father, this is what he's telling me, that this is the path and I cannot fail my father by listening to you.
I mean, I don't have to listen to you because my father tells me this.
Of course, there it comes. There it comes where, for example, in his behavior, where he has faith, not so as not to disobey faith, so as not to disobey. And that's why we are very disobedient, no? Because we don't have that faith, not even the size of a mustard seed.
Yes, they didn't give us faith, but they also gave us something called free will.
That also makes us, that's like you do things right, you can, if you do them wrong, you can rectify them, and he gave us that immense gift called free will.
Of course, and the proposal, one of the proposals that Satan makes to Jesus the man, is to crown him and make him be like the one who says the one after him, the one who rules the earth. No, and logically weaken Jesus, who has not eaten. And we already know what happens when we don't eat or drink water for a while. Logically, we are weak, not sensitive, irritable, many different psychological and physical reactions. No.
In such a state, responses falter and the mind becomes overwhelmed, not functioning at its best. Fatigue and worry take over, leaving scarce space for clarity or calmness.
And Jesus Christ handles the situation so calmly, because this is where I believe Jesus teaches us. Jesus, man, teaches us that we are always going to be tempted, not especially difficult times, because that is the paradox of the desert. You are always going to be tempted, especially in difficult times, because the difficult time is the desert. And the tension logically is playing pepo, as they say it is.
Next door is next to you talking in your ear.
That's exactly how it's similar to and the superego, isn't it?
Sure, yeah, we got it there. Exactly.
And in the end, you decide and say, right.
Exactly. Then Jesus teaches us that if you learn to meditate, if you learn to know yourself in moments of desolation and you know how to pray, because that is the man Jesus prayed. He prayed to his Father asking for strength. That is, he knew his human limitations too. So knowledge of your limitations, having limitations is not bad, but knowing where to go to have new strength is more important.
Of course, how to overcome that limitation. It's true, then, as you say, temptations are everywhere. It's how you react to that temptation. First, the no, let's not say reacted in the most appropriate way, that is through wisdom. Although he was in complicated conditions, he was always organized. And he responded to the consequences.
Of course, temptation is also because there is. If something has to be said, it is that the devil is cunning. He did not tempt him. He turns this stone into bread like you did in the desert, that is.
But he didn't have to validate either.
That exactly then, for example, realize that it is a psychological field that sometimes we want to give into temptations, for example, to pretend not because God, that is Jesus, could calmly turn the stone into bread. But why do that? That wasn't going to validate what he was.
He never needs validation.
Exactly.
So,
From a young age, he never needed validation that he was the Son of God. There was never that validation. He never needed validation. He never went and said, I am the. He never needed anything. He practiced with it, with his own action, dedicated with his own performance. Let's put it that way. And he never needed obligations. So he knew, like you said, he was so perfect that he couldn't sin and he didn't have to sin and he didn't sin. I mean, he had the options. The devil gave him multiple options for him to sin or for his faith to fall. And he didn't.
sure, why? He has to be such a strong person. So,
Correct that you are in an extreme situation and you do not bend.
I mean, that's right. It's like the unyielding determination and complete focus.
Sure, and I think the teaching is that we have that power. We can fulfill that if we focus on what is really going to give us the solution to the problem. In this case, Jesus teaches us, Jesus man invokes his Father to give him strength. And I believe that how many times in our daily life, as the man that we are, that is, or woman, Jesus being a man, teaches us in the most difficult moments, in your moments of desolation, in your moments of temptation, how many times do you go to the Father to give you not only wisdom, but to give you the solution? It's not a decision you make.
Many of us don't. Or perhaps we opt for the easier solution to navigate the situation.
Either use or fast.
They are the decisions that one has to make. But let's put it this way, made the most difficult one is to continue.
In God. Trust wholeheartedly in God's path, maintain your direction, and persist unwaveringly.
Clear focus and
Still focused. Sure, why?
If we aim to emphasize the human aspect, he didn't delegate it all to others, retaining accountability and intentionality.
sure, and I believe that's the crux of the matter. Often we try to interpret things conveniently to suit ourselves. But what teachings do Jesus impart? Man, you must refrain from molding lessons for personal convenience or subjective ideas. Adhere instead to divine principles. Making yourself a reality. What has to be made a reality so that you can overcome any adversity is to trust where you know that good exists except to be yourself. Exactly. Ye accept that you are suffering while you solve it with someone who can solve you well. Not in this case. And David wanted to talk to you too, because I think you'll find yourself a little funny.
The disciples.
Let's talk a little about the disciples, because the disciples not only saw miracles, not only did they have that one against one in teachings, they did not have a unique experience. However, they captured us many times. That is, it was like, how do you remember the boy when he said, "What a brute do you call them?"
Yes.
But why? Because let's see, because they didn't have, first here we have talked about the qualities that he should have had, then principles. They didn't all have the same qualities, that is knowledge, perseverance, because they were more human. They didn't have the focus.
As everyone arrived and got tired and lost their way, then they were more humanized, let's say. That's how they were the average human than in everyday life. The one who doesn't focus, or we have the friend who talks a lot of nonsense in the end. And you say, hey, calm down, focus, we're going to do this, and you have to guide them. Or the one who doesn't want to listen, or the one who doesn't think we can do anything. I get together 10 friends and I say, let's get into a business. Not to say, no, 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 it's not going to work. We're not going, this is the light. Go, look, go. This is the business that we are going to do. Some will decide, others will hesitate, others halfway will withdraw, others will say, don't you know I don't follow you? That's not going to work. So each one has a different opinion, that each one has been raised differently, each one has different strengths. But he knew that by gathering all his disciples, each one that was going to contribute a different strength, and that the union of all was what he wanted. The singularities of each one could strengthen each one of them. That is, one has a strength and the other, upon seeing the strength, went to what it is like, what it is to learn from him. So that's why his disciples were like that. So everyone had a peculiarity.
That's right. And the most important thing is that you see that Jesus, man, teaches them not only to be a team, but that the most important thing of all this was mission, fulfilling the mission no matter what it was and no matter what it cost. Because at the end of the day, they had already been rewarded. What do I mean? Logically, they didn't understand this until after Jesus died and rose again, that their prize was that they no longer had sins, thanks to their belief that Jesus died on the cross. But before all this happened, Jesus definitely chose people who had studies like Matthew, people who were unstudied like Peter. What is Jesus trying to teach us here with a good teacher? Can he learn everything well? How patience gives delicacy? How can you put theories? You teach them in practice. It's practically like we were talking recently about the little pedagogical, which was an English course. Jesus Christ, Jesus, man, teaches us how to be pedagogical.
Certainly, as you possess 13 distinct perspectives,
You have 12 different minds, sorry.
And it's funny because we were just talking about this.
sure, then he was a great teacher. So each one of his students, in this case the disciples, learned. Some practiced differently because each student was different, but under the same message it was. The same message was replicated by each one of them, and each one understood it in a different way, and likewise they made different experiences.
And everyone fulfilled their mission as they wanted, or Jesus, but they did it in their own ways. So that's why I tell you that for me, Jesus with his disciples is the appropriate message of. If we really want to teach other people what we know, how much do we invest in them? Because Jesus, man, invested everything, left nothing for himself. In fact, how many times are there parts of the Bible that he says are with me? And of course, they know these things. I mean, you've already taught him, and he patiently repeated the class. I mean, here is the perfect teaching because it wasn't you failed, you stayed for years, or it was something tangential like yes or no. If not, no, the important thing is that you learn so that you can fulfill the mission. And when I'm not there, have foundations so that you can continue to distinguish information so that you can fulfill the mission as you can do it, not in the only way that you know how to do it, but logically with the objective that we already have in mind, right? Or that we haven't proposed. So I think we have this map, but we rarely use it.
Sure, because we don't see
No, you don't see it this way. You don't see it this way or how we're doing it, like I told you.
Everybody.
They know and assume Jesus God, but no one sees him in the human side. That is because no one wants to see him that way, because the messages they bring to you,
Can you say me?
I can follow them as well, which may encourage more people to do the same. Give yourself an example. See that what he said I can do or I can do. I can be an apostle. I can be reading from him. I can also become one of his disciples, not live, but with them by practicing the messages he lives. And here we are talking that the messages are beautiful and have a spectacular load of knowledge. And that if you make it experiential, there is nothing beyond that to make it experiential. Ye look at what your mistake was or what you have to do here for the rest of your days.
And well, the teaching went further because the disciples were participatory. That is, they were people who voluntarily were students also once proposed. But we are also going to talk about the teachings to those who did not have the same ideology, such as I write them and the Pharisees. So teaching was so you could be so perfect. Because remember that the Pharisees, the scribes, wanted him to say something to turn him against him. But he was always, no, I don't think it's suspicious. I believe that he was always fair with his answer because he never did it with the intention of offending, but with the intention of responding. And make the scribes and Pharisees reflect on their message.
Of course, for you, because when you reflect, you see your mistake and know what your mistake was. That is what you are failing in. That is, it already disarms you.
Sure, and for example, he says a phrase. He says a phrase that I love when they put him to the test logically. Jesus, man and as a man, they ask him, don't they ask him, well, Jesus, if we have to pay taxes to Caesar, I mean, of course, it's a question. I mean,
Let's put it this way to make that.
fall exactly in front of the Romans, which they did not allow anything more powerful than themselves to exist.
Absolutely, yes.
Was it wrong to question it?
Exactly then. But look where the detail of his wisdom is, no? And his good heart, because the answer so simple. He says someone has a coin. They give him the coin and he says, of what? What is it? What do you see here on the coin? Stop that then. He says a lot. It just seems easy. Give your brain to what is the brain and what is God's. What is God's is like someone who says, don't put everything in the same basket because God's things are God's. That is, God has everything. It doesn't belong to God, even to that coin. That's it. But in your closed little mind, don't give it. If you give it, if they think they are God's, give it that, which is a small thing compared to what one has to give to God.
Right? And not settling is the most polite way to say, hey, do you think this is okay? Well, it's wrong. In other words, your way of thinking is wrong and you are making me fall into this type of evil in this evil game, it makes it so easy to give yourself to what Caesar is and give God what God is. I mean, do you know what you are going to give? That is, only you know what you are going to give, or only you know what is valuable.
Exactly, better, rather. You couldn't have said it because it's true. You value what you decide, value it, don't you? And something I also like about Jesus, man, there's that one. There is a Pharisee by the name of Nicodemus who was curious to talk to Jesus, but did not want to do so in public because logically there was opposition between his teachings in the teachings of Jesus and what the Pharisees taught. And Jesus humbly grants him an audience, that is, a meeting at night. And I love how he explains it to him. What is how? How can one of us enter the kingdom of heaven? No, because he tells you, of course, he tells you, you have to be reborn. So even Codemo answers, but how? I may go back to my mother's womb, but here it is. I mean, it's so beautiful because he makes it look so simple again. Jesus's level of genius is above all others in me, in my opinion, because he talks about the spiritual. The more other people are thinking about earthly things, that is, he is thinking about other dimensions that other people don't think about.
Sure, yeah.
So here comes the detail, the patience to explain that it has to be reborn in the spirit. What does being born again mean by believing first that the Messiah is here to cleanse your sins? And it is so simple now, and try to live according to how the Messiah lived. In other words, it's not that you won't sin because logically we are not God. No, but that you make the effort not to do so, or
Be, and the message is to be reborn, to be born again. It is to stop doing what you are doing and do. That is the good, that is what you are doing is wrong. That rebirth is from there changing your course. I mean, you're just doing it wrong. I mean, no, rebirth doesn't mean you're going to be born again, right? Or if not, it draws a line where you start a new game with the change you need to make to your life and leave the rest behind. I mean, we don't see it as simple, but we have thought too much, and let's not tell him to translate, but rather understand what his words are and land them. Let's say it like that, because in the end, he, as a deity, spoke to humans and taught humans. Humans. Let's say towards water. He taught us his wisdom to get to a spiritual part then, and he had to come down as a human to transit among humans to teach humans how to get to the spiritual part.
that's right. And there is a very big fact in Jesus that he teaches us to, when someone hits us, turn the other cheek not. And the theory, he speaks it not with the other cheek, but also gives us practice. In what way is he betrayed by one of his apostles? No, and he doesn't seek revenge. Rather, he prays for him then.
I believe that Marx was not betrayed. He knew that had to happen. It was part of the whole plan. That is, I think that I saw one of these the other time, as if he also encouraged him to make that decision, because let's see, for him, he knew what was going to happen, and if there was not, let's put it this way, in quotation marks, that betrayal, this plan did not take place. I mean, the plan was set. I knew what you Everyone had a role. Everyone knew what was going to happen. So I took the weight off from the person who sold it because he had to fulfill that mission too. And he had to do it with faith because he knew he had to do it. I mean, no, I don't see it as betrayal. Of course, it sees it as betrayal because he's the one who delivers it.
Obviously, yes, absolutely.
Don't you think faith was also essential for moving forward as it was part of the plan?
I believe that there is a point in the scriptures that says that Judas he was convinced by the devil, right? Then in itself, there was no longer the consciousness of God or the teachings of Jesus the man, but evil already existed. So he chose evil.
About no.
So,
Jesus anticipated everything that would unfold.
sure.
So in the end, he possessed the gift of forgiveness for him.
Indeed, that's the detail about Judas in the story. Because Jesus, man, can't decide for him. What he did was good. I am going to give him all my teachings. And he has free will to decide with everything I teach him, with everything I love him. Still, not to make that decision anymore. He made it. And when he made it, well, nothing is going to change logically because he has already decided. It's that part of you and that criterion. But here comes what perhaps catches my attention a lot because Jesus, logically, Judas grabs him and gives him a kiss on the cheek, and Jesus tells him, do what you have to do. I mean, you don't condemn him. You don't condemn him because that's turning the other cheek, not being resentful, not having a grudge. But here comes Judas's guilt in doing this act. He had no faith and thought that his sin was so great that Jesus no longer loved him and that he could not that sin could not be forgiven. And I believe that that is Judas's big mistake. Because by being with Jesus, he would have really believed in Jesus and his teachings. Had Judas truly embraced Jesus' teachings, he would have known even his sin could be forgiven. Instead, plagued by guilt and temptation, he chose to end his life with the Bible describing demons influencing him.
Certainly, this brings us to the reflection on the desert scene.
It also depends on
Temptation, of course, Judas.
how to act amid temptation.
Exactly. And Jude is a reflection of what not to do when one is tempted. Because remember, the problem with Judas is that he had the ideology that Jesus had to be someone who would defeat the Romans, take them out of the U of the Romans, and make Israel independent. So he, Judas, wanted the will of his ideology to be fulfilled, but not the will of God. And that was Judas's mistake, of course.
Did you let yourself be convinced?
Exactly, because in their minds, all the Pharisees who had in their minds that Jesus had to be like a new David, a stronger David than he was. What do I know? An army general, a person who defeats his enemies, but Jesus came to a spiritual field where you are freed from the book of sin.
But it was not about something military or something about liberation by force, but this was about ideology, exactly ideas.
Of ideas, and behaviors. Because if something is repeated a lot in the Bible, it is that there were always dominions, new kingdoms, but those kingdoms died and fell. And I think there is a good detail in Daniel's story with Nebuchadnezzar that makes him dream about a statue, the head of gold, the part of the torso of silver, the part of the bottom of bronze. The legs were of iron and the feet were of clay. So what do you want? That is the symbolism that even kingdoms, any kingdom is always going to succumb to the power of God, and they are only transcendental, but the kingdom of God is forever. And I believe that Jesus was very sincere in not selling him the ideology that he was going to free them from their yokes or sufferings, because even he tells his apostles that is, it must have been a very, very hard message to say no. He says that in my name they are going to suffer, they are going to experience tribulations, right? And he tells them, and he's very sincere, he says, but here the advantage is that you are going to be judges with me before the 12 tribes, right? So the reward is not earthly. They suffer earthly because he is not here, so that you can be at peace on this earth, but in peace, in a place where peace does exist.
Who, as he said, never came to fight physically.
Exactly.
The most wine is to create awareness of another type of liberation. A liberation seeing in the spiritual life for eternity, but not at the moment that I go, I take a free army, an army liberates you at this moment, yet another oppressor may come, yet again you are oppressed. Thank you. I'm giving you the salvation like eternal. Let's say, if the salvation that he may suffer now, but that is momentary.
So it's momentary, yilo. And also, for example, we can also talk a little about the Jesus who is physically punished, the man punished before the Romans. If one thing the Romans were very good at, it was killing and making their own.
Torture, of course.
Torture. So let's talk a little bit about that, David. He was practically mutilated.
Considering his numerous appearances, he conveyed messages that opposed the empire and Pharisees, creating tensions. His multiple appearances, let's put it this way, before his disciples and with the disciples, there were two currents that did not sympathize with him. It was the empire itself. It was the oppressor of the people, and the other, the Pharisees, who wanted, because let's say he contradicted them and made them see that they were
Paving.
they were wrong. Then there were two, they were angry and they wanted to see the end of this, because each one felt the same, that I did not have an oppressed people, that they felt free, because he spoke that we will all be free, we will all be or have a better life. But the message wasn't that we have a better life, because we are going to free ourselves from this yoke, but a life in the spiritual part, right? So I had two big enemies who joined at the end. So the deal they gave him was completely brilliant, and they did it was.
Have you seen the Passion of Christ, David?
Yes, not only was it widely acknowledged, but it was also known that no one could endure the sheer number of lashes inflicted for it.
Already when they passed that maximum number that anyone could, dressing there was no longer as if the courage of those who were there were already there, as if he heard this, not anymore, stop. But they had to comply with it. That is, they set a number for the activity, their maximum
but that no one was going to comply with them because at the beginning everyone fell and the punishment did not continue. But he endured everything that is beyond the. He exceeded the maximum limit. That is, no one had seen anyone cross that limit that already caused the expulsion towards the Romans themselves.
That's me.
And at the same time, have a little mercy towards the person who was being punished.
And the symbolism is very beautiful of punishment and classification, because you can physically see what we do to our spirit when we sin. That's the detail, the symbolism, that he, being fair, deserved nothing. That's because that's what we do spiritually. When we sin, we destroy ourselves, we mutilate ourselves, we crucify ourselves, we humiliate ourselves. And when I want people to understand this, when Jesus, man, goes through all this, he's teaching you the reflection of how destructive sin is to yourself. And of course, why? That's the detail. The detail is not that I say what a shame, not to thank God he went through this, because that's what I do with myself. Every time I make a bad decision or something evil or sin or I'm disobedient, that's how I take the pieces of my soul, my spirit, my mind. Because something we can validate is when it disturbs your spirit, disturbs your mind. No, so let's do a little reasoning when we see the man Jesus being punished, especially if he sees in the movie
The Passion of Christ. La.
Passion of Christ. Because symbolism is that what happens in you, in your soul or in your spirit and in your mind. When you sin, you mutilate yourself, you punish yourself, don't you? And in this case, he's not a Roman. Punishing you is an evil spirit and giving yourself that whipping.
And not only that, but you set the limit of the pot.
Likewise, it is true you impose the punishment on yourself. You impose the punishment on yourself. And the truth is that seeing the resilience of enduring so much punishment is also a moment of teaching, because in all that punishment and all that tribulation, he never lost faith. And through faith, there was the promise of bodily resurrection. Essentially, Jesus transforming from man to spiritual God, exemplifying divinity.
Transition.
The transition unveils profound lesson about resilience, showing how his transformation foreshadows what awaits you at the end of your journey. So he leaves us a complete map. So that's why, as you say, David, they don't call him a genius because he is God. But if we separate him because he was also a man, no, and he became a man, and no, that's a reality. We cannot stop cataloging genius because he exemplified all theories in practice.
Sure, everything. Yes, it was.
A practical book, David, was a complete book.
Sure enough, his mastery of the scriptures involved simplifying wisdom through parables, making it easier to comprehend and apply. His teaching method revolved around breaking down complex ideas into relatable examples. And you understand the message much faster. And with examples, let's put it this way. It's like the one who says, I'll teach you to, or you learn to add with Apple. Then you get the whole book. He condensed it into this type of knowledge that he imparted to you throughout his journey as a human being.
Sure, as a man,
Sure. And then, for example, we can say that by simplifying the message, because he says, well, I leave you two commandments: love God, especially the one called your neighbor. That is because, yes, and the truth is, if you start analyzing whether you comply with these two things, you comply with all the laws, yes, of the Old Testament. I mean, it simplifies it so well that you can imagine how difficult it is to simplify something so complex that is the entire Old Testament. That's why it's in two such simple sentences.
That's why I tell you, he had to know, he had to read, he had to, because what he did was that condense everything so that you don't have the excuse that I can't read it without this first time in practice. I'm going to teach you how you have to do it. Don't read if you want. Don't you read the book? Don't read it, but I'm going to simplify it for you with my jumps, not with living proof of what the Holy Scriptures indicate.
Sure, and so did Jesus. This one teaches us. Jesus, man, also teaches us that you have to prepare yourself, because he, being God, could, what do I know, say and do. But he, in his man form, said, well, I am going to teach that it is possible with dedication, with preparation, with wisdom, with studying. No, then he leaves us even that. Prepare, plan, look for good advice, look for good mentors in your parents. No, logically. And I think that's maybe it's something that we underestimate many times, right?
Well, we don't see it. We simply don't. We don't want to see it, which is why perhaps bringing this topic to many, let's hope that this helps them and that they try to search again and that they reread this and really take it to their experiential part and that they see Jesus as a man who came to fulfill his omission, but who had to prepare. So, that you also see it from the part that you can do the same. You're not God, you're not Jesus, yes, but you have to prepare yourself. You can also follow in his footsteps.
Follow your path just as the apostles pursued theirs.
Correct. So it is not to practice a religion, but so that you apply it as knowledge towards yourself for your personal benefit, let's put it this way. If you don't want to see it from the religious part of the personal part that you can improve with from your personal part, with the behaviors of Jesus, that we do not see him as God, but rather we see him as the human.
So to end our program today, David, we always end with, what did we learn today from this podcast? What do you think you learned from what we talked about today?
Me first is this, we have to be constant, we have to always be oriented, focused, treat everyone well. That we need preparation and that we ourselves can generate many changes, that Jesus gave us the guidelines for how we have to behave as humans to reach eternal happiness. Let's put it that way, because he had to come as a human. Living as a human or as a man, living as a man, being on earth, living together, generating good communication and community, a good, let's say, a good deal with all messages so that we are better as humans or as people, and that with these behaviors or these lessons, as I told you, if we follow the same steps, we can get to what we want in the end, get to that part that tells us eternal life and that we are going to be happy forever.
That's right. By seeing Jesus as a human, we believe we can follow his example too.
Sure, why that's what I learned, that Jesus leaves us the map. of how we must behave, regardless of how we feel about our convictions, in order to fulfill a mission that is greater than ourselves. Because if something that we see very much in common is Jesus, to be a good mentor, first you have to be a good student, and apart from being a leader, is to search. Knowledge, but also lead by example so that your theories are always practical, and how to make your concepts visualize through a metaphor, a paradox, or a story. No, because here comes the detail. I mean, stop. To do that, you have to be patient. And the most important thing is, and it's something I really didn't think about until we were talking. It's what sin looks like. Sin, if you see how Jesus was punished, it's what we do to ourselves, because unfortunately we inflict that pain on ourselves when we do things that are not good and are not pleasant. That was perhaps what caught my attention the most than what we have talked about today.
Let's hope that with what we have talked about during this time, many will think differently and also re-educate themselves. And at the same time, that we have to do things differently for things to change.
Well, David, then what are we going to talk about the other Wednesday, if I know if it's possible on Tuesday, Wednesday? So,
Tell me more, as we've agreed on the study plan.
so another one, I'm going to send you the audio of two Dostoevsky. Of course, I think that Dostoevsky, that crime and punishment is a topic. I think it's better than Freud's.
I also believe, because Freud's will focus on the suprego ego, that it must also be explained so that everyone, when they watch the podcast or listen to it, knows that we can control it and how to control it.
Next week, the Freud episode will be released, and I believe we delivered quality content during its production. And I also love this podcast because it definitely opened a new perspective. But Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is real? Is it a work of art? There is a lot of critical thinking. There is a lot of human reflection. There are many psychological aspects that we can analyze. And the most important thing is how we become responsible for our crime and punishment, right?
Reflecting our actions.
That's absolutely correct. Yee, this is remarkably good. I believe it could easily become one of your favorite books ever.
I must share with you. Please send me the book. Listen closely, absorb everything deeply, and then let's practice together next week.
So it will be then, don't forget, next week we will be talking about Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky's free classic Crime and Punishment awaits us, full of rich ideas and profound revelations. What are we aiming to extract from this masterpiece? Of course, we'll explore its logical constructs, dissect his intentions, and unravel the profound teachings embedded within his story. Above all, we'll seek self awareness, discovering what Dostoevsky's consciousness unfolds for our minds in this extraordinary book. Remember, if you appreciate our content, be sure to subscribe for updates, give us a like, and spread the message widely. And most importantly, enjoy the content, talk about the content. So don't comment, but don't talk. And if one day you would like to participate in our podcast, especially with David and I, write us a comment that you would like to talk about a specific topic. We prepare, we send you the invitation, and so you will have the opportunity to be with David and me and start from this exploration of the human experience. So we say goodbye at Itexco Parkas. Thank you for being with us, and always stay curious. Thank you.
I'm trying to coexist. Yeah.
That was good, crazy.
Yeah.
Indeed, David, your point is valid.
Hey, some of them sent me to the mail, but I've never opened it. Regarding this language plan of this university, yes, they have sent it to me, but I have not opened it because I already tell you I have seen the Yi Pensum. I don't see that they really teach because it's stopping you and I need it. Have a vocabulary base, because if not, no, I'm not going to understand. It's like it is like we have a person who doesn't know Spanish and we don't read vocabulary that he doesn't know, and he starts telling him, look, see the verb. The verbs are these, the noun. What is sin? What is the person going to do to me? I don't understand you.
You miss out simply because you need to identify what a table is first.
What is a refrigerator? How do you say cookie? Because there you identify the object, and from there you can add the adjective, the noun.
Right, because
One solid anchor is essential to navigate everything else.
we learn by seeing, listening, and many times by touch like this.
It is.
It is the best way to learn it.
Europe, that's right. So now we are going to start with Jesus. Now this is going to be good.
Yeah, let her come back.
I'm going to do the introduction now. It was good? It wasn't very good, yeah.
There was the subject.
The workshops that you but leave me. See if it. I have sending it to you immediately now. Just wait. Hold on for another moment. Fatal powerful. Yes.
I security cups with a bookstore. Yesterday, my unconscious made it out. No matter what happens, if that's true, even my daughters won't change their stance.
Look, consider Dostoevsky, and given my recollections, he philosophically expresses that man dreads death due to his immense love for existence. In my opinion, Dostoevsky remains intriguingly profound in his thoughts.
Genius.
I'll definitely send it to you quickly after this, David. Just hang on.
Mr. Armando.
Son. Only 472, no nothing. Something additional, nothing extra or excessive, nor anything particularly deficient.
I just keep busy and I'm relaxed.
So my bread well then?
Sister, I won't take any more time from you because it's already early in the morning. We are talking, brother. Today has been liberating another perspective, and
Indeed, that's correct. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities, and let me confirm Wednesday works for you by then.
yes.
All right, take care of anything. Call me, okay? Yes, sir.
Brother, take care of me now.
You know,